of Heavy Hearts and Helping Hands by aworus on Archive of Our Own. Summary. Izuku learns how to hate when he is 4 years old. 5 times Izuku hates his hands, and 1 time he doesn't. Before we get into the story, I'd like to preface this video with a trigger warning. This story contains elements of implied self-harm, implied child abuse, and dissociation. If this is potentially triggering, please proceed with caution or click off of the video entirely. 1. Izuku is 4 years old and he's reaching. His All Might plushie is barely out of arm's length and he's reaching. He's reaching and pulling, just like he's seen his mother do 1,001 times, and yet his plushie remains stubbornly still. With everything he has, he tries to imagine what it would be like having his mom's pull, as if believing alone could possibly be enough to manifest the power. In his little 4-year-old mind, he thinks that maybe, just maybe, it could be. That's why, at least twice a week, Izuku would bounce up to his mother, eyes alight, and ask her the same question. "How does it feel?" he would eagerly ask, climbing onto her lap. And every time, his mother would indulge him with a smile. "It's in my hands," she would say, gently pressing the thumb of one hand into the palm of the other. "It's hard to explain. It's just..." She'd shrug. "It's always been there." And then she'd chuckle, a lovely sound. "You know, my parents told me that I pulled the glasses off of the face of the nurse that delivered me." And Izuku would ooh and ah, as if he hasn't heard the same story more times than his little 4-year-old brain could count. Because how amazing it must be to have a power that is your own and only your own. Izuku would do anything for that. So he reaches. But even as everything inside of him wills the toy to float in his direction, little All Might does not move. The door to his room, however, does. And Izuku wants to pump his fist in the air and jump for joy because the doctor man was wrong. He just opened the door with his quirk. But when he looks over, he sees his mother standing in the doorway. Her hand is on the doorknob. She looks at Izuku. His hand is still outstretched towards his plushie, still reaching. "Oh, Izuku," she whispers, small and broken. She staggers over with uneven steps and trembling legs and all but collapses next to his bed. She wraps her arm around him, delicately, as if he would shatter into pieces if she squeezed any harder. Izuku does not hug his mother back. He remains hunched over himself, hands resting on his knees. He curls them into fists. Useless, he thinks, for the very first time. These hands are useless. 2. "Hey, Deku," Tasaki says. Izuku has to bite his tongue to refrain from greeting his classmate in return. He's only recently learned that that tone of hey does not mean hello. It never does. The last time that Izuku had responded in kind, he had earned a swift kick to the backs of his knees. Tasaki crouches down slightly to meet his eyes. Izuku takes a step back, the gravel on the ground crunching under his foot. "What hand do you write with?" And Izuku blenches, because that sounds like a question that warrants an answer. Such instances are rare for Izuku. When he is prompted into speaking, it tends to be some sort of trick. Perhaps the teacher has given him an extremely complicated or outright unsolvable question, or maybe one of the other students has asked him something to which Izuku thought he responded normally, but for some reason his answer elicits several giggles and jabs, and it leaves Izuku feeling confused and ashamed. So naturally, Izuku hesitates. The answer should be easy. "Right," he wants to say. "Right." but instead he's going through every possible scenario in which his answer could be turned against him. As his brain lags, Kachan pipes up. Deku's right-handed. But the answer comes off as off-handed, absent. Izuku lifts his gaze from the ground to peer at the blonde. Where the boy had been leaning lazily against a wall of the alley before, he is now standing stock straight, stock still. He has Izuku's notebook in a white-knuckled grip, close to his face and open to a page Izuku can't see. He's reading it. "Right-handed, huh?" Tasaki says, a sneer finding its way on his face. "Well then, it sure would be a shame if something happened to that hand, so you wouldn't be able to write anymore." Tasaki casts a meaningful glance at Tsubasa, who stands next to him. They must be in on some kind of joke that Izuku isn't, because Tsubasa returns it with a grin. Suddenly, Bakugo's eyes tear from the book to look at Izuku. He's too busy trying to decipher the blonde's expression to see the hit coming. Tsubasa punches him in the stomach. The force of it makes him gag and fall to his knees. Instinctively, he wraps his arms around his middle to protect his torso. It does nothing to lessen the kick that Tasaki deals to the side of his head. The blow makes him collapse on his side, head colliding with the concrete hard enough that he sees stars. He shifts his position so that his arms shield his head and neck, just like when they do tornado drills in school. He's never experienced a tornado, but the lesson still comes in handy pretty often. Izuku jolts as his right wrist is grabbed and yanked away from his face. He cracks one eye open, just in time to see Tasaki lift his foot from the ground and stomp directly onto Izuku's hand. He screams. The sound of it echoes through the alley, along with the sickening laughs of the two boys. Izuku doesn't hear a sound for Bakugo. Through teary eyes, he sees the blonde standing there, unmoving, Izuku's notebook still in hand. He's reading again. Tasaki puts all of his weight onto his foot and grinds his hand into the ground, eliciting a series of gruesome snaps and cracks. Izuku writhes pathetically where he lies. He instinctively tries to pull his hand away, but the action makes his muscles stretch and tear, and the pain causes his wailing to begin anew. Through tear-blurred eyes, Izuku sees Bakugo finally divert his attention from the notebook in his hand. The blonde looks at Izuku. His eyes are filled with something adjacent to horror. As Bakugo burns the notebook in between his palms, and Tasaki breaks the bones of the hand under his foot, Izuku thinks, just for a second, that maybe it's what he deserves. 3. "You're aging me here, Midoriya." Recovery Girl's voice is worse than angry. It's disappointed. "I won't keep doing this for you," she says, voice tight, as if it pains her as much as it pains him, though he doubts it does. "Giving you this crutch, allowing you to go on like this," she says, gesturing weakly to him, his bandaged hands. "The next time you come to me with an injury like this," she sighs, tired and world-weary, "I will not heal you." Izuku's heart drops to his stomach. "Find another way," she says, turning away as if she can't bear to look him in the eyes as she says it. The heroine pulls the curtain shut behind her, not even allowing Izuku the right to explain himself. But he shouldn't have to. She knows about his quirk, and still... "Find another way," she says. Find another way, is what they always said. Be a policeman, a fireman, a doctor, maybe. Find another way to be heroic, they would tell him. Because you cannot be a hero. Izuku looks down at his hands, bandaged and trembling in his lap. He tries to bend his fingers despite their confinement. The motion is only successful in sending sharp fireworks of pain up his arms, making him gasp at the suddenness of it. When the pain fades, he does it again. Find another way. is what she says. You cannot be a hero, is what he hears. Not like this. 4. Izuku is 14 years old, and he's reaching. The portal, barely out of an arm's length, wavers until it is a mere pinprick before it disappears entirely, fading from existence with an audible pop. And Izuku is left reaching for nothing but the cluster of trees that stood beyond it. Izuku's entire world is deathly silent. The last thing he had heard had been Bakugo's voice, horribly resigned as he demanded stay away. As if Izuku's entire life hasn't been spent following his footsteps and nipping his ankles. Still, it seems that's one thing he'd done right, Izuku thinks, as his arm drops to the ground. The impact causes white-hot pain to flare up his arm, through his shoulder and into his chest where it stays and burns. It burns so much that he can't think of anything else. He takes a deep breath, the effort causing his ribs to expand and crack and tear, and he wails. He lifts both of his arms as best as he can, which likely isn't very well considering they're both fractured in at least 100 different places, and slams his weakly curled fists against the ground. He does it once, twice, before he feels several hands pull his body back. But they leave his arms alone, afraid to injure them further, so he keeps going. The hands fall away by the 4th hit, and Izuku distantly realizes that he's probably using his quirk. Suddenly, just as the 6th hit makes contact with the broken ground, Izuku feels weak. He slumps, and the red haze clouding his vision slowly begins to give way to black. The boy falls backward, now overwhelmed by the simple task of keeping his body upright. He's caught by 2 gentle hands, one steadying on his back, and one supporting his neck, fingers curled into his hair. Almost as if in third person, Izuku sees his teacher holding him upright. With the strength he has left, Izuku lowers his head and looks at his hands. They're gruesome and misshapen and disgusting. He tries to lift them. They do not move. His vision fades to black. 5. He had her. She was right there. He can still feel the way his uniform had stretched over his bicep from how tightly the girl had clutched it in her tiny hands, the way her hair tickled his neck, and her dull horn had jutted into his jawline. He can still see her eyes, a new kind of crimson that didn't threaten him with anger or pain. They were full of a desperate sort of hope, only to quickly fade into a dull resignation as he failed her. Night-Eye stands abruptly, slamming his hands onto the table. Izuku's mind is brought harshly back to the present moment. "You could have ruined the entire operation," he bellows. He knows the hero is talking to him, but the words waver and lose meaning entirely as they fall onto his ears. Izuku's eyes do not leave his hands, open and resting in his lap. They're trembling. He must sit there in silence for longer than it feels, or perhaps Night-Eye just became fed up with his lack of response very quickly. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Izuku watches as a single tear falls from his eye and drips onto his palm. He doesn't feel it. Probably because every single one of his senses is telling him he's completely underwater already. What he does feel is Aizawa-sensei's gaze on him. It's different from the others in the room. While Night-Eye's eyes scorch holes into his skin, penetrate the muscle and bone, and make every fiber of his insides burn with shame, Aizawa-sensei's gaze is cool, soothing in an odd way as it washes over him. It is no less deep. He can feel it work its way through the quickly spreading cracks in his composure. Izuku lets it. Night-Eye says something else, then, and he thinks he hears Rocklock's voice as well, but he doesn't register the words. Izuku balls his hands into fists. It seems like slow motion. "Sensei," he says. Breathes, more like. Night Eye and Rocklock continue yelling, so it's clear that his voice was not loud enough for them to hear. It seems that it carried far enough when Aizawa-sensei replies, low and carefully indifferent. Yes. Can I? His throat closes involuntarily. He digs his fingers into his palms as hard as he can. He doesn't feel it. Can I go? He asks, voice cracking pathetically. Izuku doesn't look over, but he can tell that his teacher is watching him. The weight of his gaze multiplies. While it had been formerly cool, it is now freezing. It pours over him like gallons of ice water seeping into every crevice and crack. He shivers. Yes, Aizawa-sensei says at last. Izuku would breathe a sigh of relief if he could breathe at all. You can go. Izuku does not need to be told twice. He stands much too quickly to have been without the use of his quirk and leaves the room. He hears the yelling even from outside of the door. The rage has been turned toward Aizawa-sensei, it seems. It makes Izuku feel even worse. It's unlike his teacher to protect him from something like this. Sure, the man will throw himself into any fight, any battle to ensure the safety of his students, but he has never, ever been one to shy away from laying out the consequences to their own actions, no matter how harsh. So why? Sure, Aizawa wouldn't stand for any unfair disciplines, but that's just the thing. Izuku deserves it. He did nearly ruin the mission. He failed. Crouched on the tile, Izuku looks at his hand. He feels the phantom sensation of tiny and feather-light fingers grazing his palm, hesitant but desperate for his help. He feels it fall away, dragged out of his grasp as he does not know a single thing to stop it. He lets out a hoarse sob. He immediately muffles it with his hands. He bites the heel of his palm hard as he sits there, alone except for the voices of the adults in the other room. He hears a voice say, "He could have died!" And Izuku thinks that maybe it would have been for the best. 6. Izuku sits up in his bed. The lightning makes the scars on his hands shine. He thinks that maybe, if they were on someone other than him, they'd be beautiful. However, they are not on someone other than him. They are on him, so they are disgusting and ugly. He clenches his fist and expands his fingers in a consistent rhythm taught to him by Recovery Girl. It is supposed to help with the ache. At this moment, it does not. Izuku slowly swings his legs over the side of his bed, sluggish, not from sleep, but from laying in his bed, motionless, only pretending to sleep for hours on end. Lightning strikes. Izuku sighs. If he wasn't able to fall asleep before, he certainly won't be having any luck now. He stands, an action that reveals that the pain is not only in his arms and hands, but across his entire body, a consistent throb. He makes his way through the common room to the kitchen, but only after listening through the wall for several minutes to determine that no one was occupying the space. On autopilot, Izuku grabs a kettle, fills it with water, and sets it on the stove, turning the heat all the way up. Izuku blinks, and the kettle is letting out a whistle. He doesn't have it in him to be concerned about the time he's losing to his own mind. He finds his hands hovering over the sides of the kettle, relishing in the warmth. He imagines closing the distance between his palms and the aluminum. He imagines the feeling of his skin sizzling and bubbling against the heated metal. Izuku knows about burns. When they get to 3rd degree, you lose feeling entirely. He wonders if that would make the pain go away, or if the damage he's done to them already is too deep to be fixed by such a surface-level solution. Izuku pulls his hands back and forces them down to his sides. He shouldn't be thinking about that. He swallows, busying himself with retrieving a mug and tea packet from the cabinets. He gets one of the generic kinds. Yaoyorozu told him that he was more than welcome to her delicious, expensive, name-brand blends, but he knows she was just being kind. He doesn't deserve it. As he pours the water into the mug, some of it spills onto his hand. The sudden heat makes him flinch, which causes more hot water to splash over the rim and onto his fingers. The surface-level pain is a complete contrast and a welcome distraction from the bone-deep ache. Izuku huffs, shakes his head in frustration, trying to dispel the thoughts. No, that's bad. That's not a normal thing to think. He sets the kettle back onto the stove, turning off the heat. He struggles a little, trying to open the tea packet with the way his hands shake and refuse to cooperate. He succeeds after an embarrassing 24 seconds. He dips the packet into the water several times, taking minute satisfaction in watching the mixture diffuse. He cups his hands around the mug and turns around, intending to take it back to his room. There is a figure obstructing his path. He drops the mug, shattering it on the ground. Izuku stares at him, eyes wide. He can't react to the man's presence or the glass on the floor or the tea burning his feet. Because suddenly, Izuku is a child at the end of a long, dark hallway. There is a door behind him, but it's locked. There is, however, a window to his left. He weighs his options. The window would take too long to open. It's locked at the top, and Izuku doesn't think he'd even be able to reach it with how small he is. He debates running past the man, beside him. The gaps between the man and the walls are small, but Izuku is smaller. He'd make it. He could go in between the man's legs with how he's standing. Because Izuku's small. He'd fit. He'd fit, right? As Izuku takes a half step backward, hitting the wall and the doorknob that reaches the small of his back rather than the top of his head, he thinks, no, I am not small. Not anymore. So Izuku takes a step forward, lightning quick, and for some reason the room around is lit up with a toxic green and looks oddly like a kitchen. His fist hits the man's cheekbone with a rewarding crack, but Izuku isn't done. He reels his other fist back to deal another hit, but his hand is caught in between two larger ones and, oh, maybe Izuku is small. I'm sorry, he gasps, immediately aware of his mistake and the consequences that are bound to follow. He tries to pull his hand back to shield his head from the inevitable blow, but the man in front of him only tightens his grip. Confused, because normally they like it when Izuku cowers, he looks at the man's face. Instead of providing any sort of answer, the sight he sees only causes his confusion to increase tenfold. The face is familiar, but not in a pain, hurt, danger kind of way, but in a soft, safe, dad kind of way, and Izuku makes a horrible realization. He just punched his teacher in the face. Oh my god, he says oh so eloquently. He makes another attempt to pull his hand out of the man's grip, and is successful this time, so he curls in on himself and tries to take several steps back, but is once again impeded by the structure behind him. To compensate, he's so thoughtful. He's always so thoughtful. Aizawa takes a couple steps back to increase the distance between them. His hands are up, palms out, empty. His lips are moving as well. Izuku doesn't know if he's speaking slowly or if his mind is just operating at half the speed it normally does. He strains to make out the words. It's all right, Midoriya. It's fine. And Izuku wants to scream that it's not, because he can already see the bruise forming on his teacher's cheek. He must shake his head or say something because his teacher seems to backtrack. Okay, he says slowly, eyes sharp as he watches Izuku's reactions closely. Okay. Still, I'm not mad. That's a little better, Izuku thinks, but still, it sounds fake. Midoriya, Aizawa-sensei continues, are you with me? That's a stupid question, Izuku thinks. Of course he is. They're in the same room. Midoriya, the hero says again, and Izuku jolts. Maybe his teacher is onto something, actually. Aizawa-sensei goes to take a step forward, hand still up, and it finally spurs Izuku into answering with a frantic nod. It makes the man pause. Aizawa-sensei sighs, and Izuku's instincts tell him that the man is disappointed, but it really just sounds sad. Come on, problem child, he says. I need you with me. The man taps the top of his foot gently. It's just enough for Izuku to feel. He lifts his foot from the ground. The hero examines the bottom of his foot before saying, other, to which Izuku is quicker to respond, offering the opposite foot. I would ask you if they hurt, but the man's eyes meet his own. I have a feeling I already know your answer. Izuku bites his tongue. Aizawa-sensei ends up wrapping both of his feet with gauze and a generous amount of burn cream. It seems he was successful in avoiding the ceramic shards, but not so much the boiling tea itself. Your hands now, the hero prompts. And Izuku understands what he's asking, but he doesn't want to. Aizawa-sensei furrows his brows when Izuku doesn't move, likely associating the awareness in his eyes and the lack of movement to intentional disobedience. I just want to make sure they're okay, he says, a little slow, as if puzzled. Izuku's face twists. Because they're not. His hands aren't okay. They're horrible and painful and disgusting and useless and can't do anything right. No, stop. Wait. Aizawa-sensei looks stricken, and Izuku has a feeling that he just said something out loud. He snaps his mouth shut. The fact that it was even open in the first place confirms his fear. The hero takes in a deep breath, holds it, and lets it out slowly. The man opens his eyes. Your hand, Midoriya. Please. It's the please that does it. Izuku begins with his left, hoping that presenting his teacher with the less injured hand will soften the blow that is his right. Still, his left hand doesn't look good. His joints are swollen, and his skin is riddled with scars and now angry splotches of red from where he'd clumsily spilled his tea all over himself. The sight makes his teacher purse his lips, but the man says nothing, does nothing, until the other as well. And Izuku doesn't know why he feels like he's bearing every second of his past, present, and future with just a single appendage, but he does. He lifts his right hand. It trembles and jerks more than his left, not just from his injuries, but from his fear, as he presents his teacher with everything he is. His hand rests in Aizawa-sensei's. Charcoal eyes scan his skin, and it feels like the man has X-ray vision. It feels like he can see all of the times his bones have been fractured and left to heal unaided. All of the times they've been disjointed, then popped painfully back into place. It feels like he can see all of the places where his skin and muscle has been torn and forced to stitch itself back together. It feels like he can see every reach, every pull, every hold. And his teacher regards it like he can too. Still, he doesn't let go. It is silent as Aizawa-sensei rubs various creams into the skin of his hands. He works his fingers along the muscles, and between the bones, and soothes all of the places that Izuku aches the most. He then wraps his hands delicately, weaving the gauze through his fingers and around his palm. Even when he finishes the job, he still does not let go. Do you want to talk about it? Aizawa-sensei asks, voice a low rumble. Izuku is so tired. He looks at his teacher, and the man gives him a little nod, eyes soft. Okay, he says quietly. He looks down at Izuku's hands. Can I? Izuku dips his head. It's half a nod of acquiesce, half a slump of shame. He's been preparing himself to be berated by his teacher. He knows it's still going to hurt. I think they're incredible. Izuku's breath hitches. And I think they're powerful. Aizawa-sensei continues, voice low. Izuku's body trembles. And I think they're kind. Izuku lets out a sob. He feels his hands getting squeezed. And I think you should give them another chance. His teacher speaks slowly, as if giving every word the time it needs to sink in. Because I think... The man cuts himself off. No, I know they're going to do something amazing. Izuku rocks forward, hunched over himself completely. His body is curled around the web of hands in his lap. He feels so heavy, and yet so light. After all, the hero continues, leaning forward himself, they already have, 1,000 times. Izuku breaks, then. Thank you, he gasps, because what else can he say in response to everything he's ever wanted to hear? He looks back up to see dark eyes watching him, soft. Izuku is pulled forward to rest against Aizawa-sensei's chest. It feels like a new start. Hello everyone, this is IcarusAudios, and I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did. You can find aworus on Archive of Our Own, or through the link in the description. If you like the content and want more in the future, click the subscribe button to be notified when a new podfic comes out. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.